Hello people! It looks like character design analysis videos are pretty popular with y'all, so I'm officially announcing that I will be continuing the A Look At series. The archetype we're looking at today is Pokemon villains. I'll be covering every evil team member from grunts to admins to bosses, but also all of the other major villains in Pokemon. And yes, I included the more recent teams even if they're not as villainous as the main antagonists in their games. Like always, we're sticking to the main series in this video, and the discussion will primarily focus on concept and design, although story elements will of course be mentioned. Team Rocket was the first villainous team in Pokemon, and it served as the blueprint for all the future teams. Rocket grunts in all of their iterations look like simple, sorta cartoony thugs. I could almost see one of them carrying a giant bag with a dollar sign over their shoulder. It's a very simple outfit, but I think it does the job. Yeah, you could argue these grunts look a little bit goofy, but to me they're synonymous with Gen 1, and I think they fit that early, uncomplicated depiction of the Pokemon world perfectly. If nothing else, they at least introduced the iconic red R used by the whole faction, which is in my opinion one of the most recognizable pieces of Pokemon iconography. The Team Rainbow Rocket grunts from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon mostly stick to the same design philosophy, but with some added rainbow accents and an appropriately now rainbow colored R to reflect the faction's new makeover. I do like the female grunt's hair here. It's more unique than the typical Rocket grunt cut. I call the Team Rocket logo recognizable, but the main culprits for why that is aren't the grunts from the games, but rather Jessie and James from the anime. Some of you might wonder why I'm even bringing them up since I said this video was about the mainline games. Well, in case you forgot, Jessie and James and Meowth did make appearances in both Yellow and the Let's Go games, which technically makes them game characters, if only by a technicality. Their designs are based on the regular grunts, but the black is swapped for white and the berets are replaced by their iconic hairstyles. Jessie is also wearing a crop top, which isn't the case for the normal female grunts. Interestingly enough, the female grunt sprite in Gen 2 only seems to heavily resemble Jessie, even though they would change the design starting with Fire Red and Leaf Green. Regardless of how you feel about Jessie and James as characters in the anime or their inclusion in the games, I find it hard to deny that these designs are stellar. They contain all the basic visual elements that Team Rocket as a whole is known for, but with a healthy dash of pizzazz. It reflects their theatrical personalities. Jessie and James's hair colors are crimson and periwinkle respectively, which serves to distinguish their color scheme from each other, which is needed considering they otherwise have the same colors because of their outfits. Their hair shapes also contrast each other. Jessie's is long while James is short, and as you may know, Jessie's hair can be used to help create the shape of the letter R in some poses. I'm not going to talk about Meowth since his design is just a Pokemon Meowth, so there's not much to discuss in terms of a villain design. I feel like the majority of this trio's characterization comes from the anime because that's where they're originally from, but since this video is about the games, I don't think it's the right time to analyze them now, but I might end up talking more about them in the future if I make any videos about the anime. Moving up the chain of command, we have the Rocket admins or executives. Now the idea for these characters has existed since Gen 2, but they only all received unique names, designs, and official art in Gen 4, so I'll be focusing on those depictions of the characters. The four are high-ranking members of Team Rocket, so their designs attempt to convey a certain prestige. Archer and Ariana are wearing white uniforms which make them look special, similarly to Jessie and James. They also have these diamond shapes on their abdomens and formed by their V-necks. The subtle turtlenecks give them a certain elegance. Like I said in my rival video, Ariana bears at least a superficial resemblance to Silver. Proton and Petrol have more traditional black uniforms but with added yellow trimmings. That, combined with the fact that he's the only admin to wear a beret, makes Proton look a bit like an elite grunt of some sort. He did simply use the normal grunt sprite in Gen 2. All of this make him look somewhat battle ready, like he's the type to actually get his hands dirty, while the other admins would maybe rather sit behind and just give orders. He looks very confident with that raised collar. As for Petrol, he is distinguished by the makeup equipment on his belt. The reason he has that is because he specializes in disguises. Overall, I'm really glad these characters were created. They were needed in a game where the boss of Team Rocket doesn't make an appearance. It's better to have the unique named admins than only fight generic Team Rocket members like in Gen 2. It gives much needed faces to the story's villains. Archer makes an additional appearance in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. His outfit is different but conveys pretty much the same vibe, if not a little less distinguished. The fact that he's not wearing white may be a way of showing that he hasn't yet been promoted to that level of status, since this appearance would be earlier in the timeline. We finally made it to Team Rocket's boss, Giovanni, the first named villain in the history of the Pokemon franchise. Giovanni's had a couple different iterations over the years, but they all pretty much get across the same concept. He's a big scary businessman mafia boss type, quite elegant and even suave. Like with the grunts, Giovanni's Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon design sports the rainbow R instead of the usual red one to symbolize the newly formed Team Rainbow Rocket. His goal with Team Rocket isn't profound and doesn't involve changing the world or region in a major way, as is usually the case with the villains that came after. They just want to make money and expand their influence, which is even reflected by Giovanni's position as the Viridian City gym leader, showing that Team Rocket has ties to even the gym and league system in Kanto and Johto. Their simple thirst for power can be seen as both a weakness and a strength of Giovanni and Team Rocket. On one hand, shallow motivations like that can be considered uninteresting in a work of fantasy like Pokémon, but on the other hand, Team Rocket's MO does play a big hand in the gritty simplicity of Gen 1. Dangerous people in real life are often just petty criminals interested in money and power, and Team Rocket is just that, a realistic organized crime faction. Even when he travels across parallel dimensions to form Team Rainbow Rocket, Giovanni's goals stay the same except at a larger scale. He's purely in it for personal gain. I would like to end this section of the video by shouting out Giovanni's Gen 4 sprite that you can only see during an event. He wears a fedora and trench coat and looks very much like an old retired mafia boss. He's still formal but less exposed. Very good depiction of the character. I wish this design had official art. As if to make up for Gens 1 and 2 both having Team Rocket as its evil team, Gen 3 introduced two of them, one of which being Team Magma. The Magma Grunts uniforms are intentionally evocative of Groudon. There's the red and black color scheme, but the little horns they have on their hoods also call to mind Groudon's numerous spikes. And speaking of those hoods, they sorta make the Magma Grunts look a little bit like cultists, which is also appropriate because they borderline worship a legendary Pokemon almost like a deity. You can see that these designs lean a bit more into fantasy territory when compared to Team Rocket, who wore relatively grounded uniforms. The Magma Grunts were redesigned in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and while these designs maintain all of the key components of the originals, they have more detail and style. I definitely prefer these versions to their original iterations. They trade away a lot of the black for darker red, and I really like the striated textures on these portions of the outfits. They contrast the smoother texture of the lighter red parts. I also think shorts suit the female grunt better than the initial skirt. It feels like her movements are less restricted now. Team Magma's admins are Courtney and Tabitha. They didn't have official art in Gen 3 and their sprites basically look like grunts with some extra details. I like their more pronounced capes and Courtney's stylish slit dress, but there's not that much to talk about here when compared to their Gen 6 redesigns. These are amazing. Tabitha doesn't have his hood over his head, which differentiates him from other members of Team Magma. I'm also a big fan of him being a bigger guy. I know these games have to reuse models for the grunts, but realistically it doesn't make sense that every single member of a faction would have the same body type, and Tabitha partially remedies that. If only they'd let us change the height and width of the player characters already. As for Courtney, 10 out of 10. I love her outfit. I don't even know what to call the thing she's wearing. It's like a vest, but it's crossed into an X shape. Like I said, the female grunts in ORAS wear shorts now, so Courtney having a dress further sets her apart. Looking at her horns, which unlike with the grunts are yellow and more curved, made me realize that a lot of the Magma staff also look a little bit like stereotypical devils, do they not? You know, with the red and the horns. I think it's oddly fitting because typical Western depictions of hell tend to be fiery underground places full of lava, which is pretty similar to the kind of spots Groudon would be hanging out in. Both Tabitha and Courtney wear chunkier gauntlets than the grunts with yellow accents. Not sure if these have a practical use, but they definitely convey a higher ranking. They make the admins look almost royal. I also like how instead of one big Magma logo on their chest, they have two smaller ones on the sides. It's more classy and less garish. ORAS definitely did a stupendous job in elevating these admins to proper characters. The leader of Team Magma is Maxie. His original design features a more formal and sleek style with the signature Magma colors and logo, but unlike the grunts who look like cultists, Maxie doesn't really look like anything. He doesn't have a clear aesthetic in my opinion. The design isn't bad at all, don't get me wrong, and I think the concept is there. I just feel like he could have used more time in the oven. It's somewhat imposing, but falls short of leaving a strong impression. Luckily, Maxie was given that time in the oven in Gen 6 and his ORAS design came out much better. His outfit is now more intricate and visually interesting and shares a lot of visual cues with Courtney and Tabitha. The trench coat is very fitting for the character and along with the glasses and turtleneck make him look stern and serious. And boy do those glasses give him personality. They look a bit dorky but also very practical. And his keystone for Mega Evolving his camera up is embedded in the frames. How cool is that? Most of all, the glasses make him look like a stereotypical office worker, or more accurately, a bureaucrat. Put a pin in that. The second villainous team introduced in Gen 3 is Team Aqua. They're basically the polar opposites of Team Magma. Their grunts have a clear pirate/sailor aesthetic, you can see it in their headbands and striped shirts, and of course this makes perfect sense since Team Aqua's goal is to use Kyogre to raise the sea level. They're obviously people who spend a lot of their time on boats. Their Gen 6 redesigns go even further with the pirate look. Although these versions are more visually interesting and seem to be more thoughtfully designed, I wish they hadn't lost their casual vibe from Gen 3. Now they look a little bit more like fantasy pirates, but I kinda appreciate the somewhat pedestrian look of their original designs. The jagged ripped pants and belts are quite cool regardless. You'll notice that all Team Aqua members have darker skin in Gen 6, and I love this choice. Not only because of added diversity, but it also makes sense for a setting like Hoenn based on the Kyushu region and or including the subtropical Okinawa. I could also imagine that if Team Aqua members used to be fishermen or sailors, many of them would have gotten pretty tan from prolonged exposure to the sun, especially when compared to the pasty Team Magma, whose members probably had cushier indoor jobs. Just like Team Magma, Team Aqua's admins only had sprites in Gen 3, and they once again kinda just looked like unique runs with some extra details. Not bad designs by any means, but they pretty much pale in comparison to their ORAS redesigns. Matt is absolutely huge now. He's so big that his wetsuit seemingly tore itself apart, revealing his bare chest emblazoned with the Team Aqua insignia, which just shows his dedication to the cause. And just like in the case of Tabitha, his physique adds some much needed variety. I can totally believe this dude bro type's friendship with Archie. Shelly is 10 out of 10. Her uniform seems to be made up of a unique two-piece wetsuit. It kinda looks like some sort of experimental designer model. I feel like it's a mix of fantasy and sci-fi, but either way it's definitely not something you'd see the average person wear at the beach. I like how the comparatively normal swim goggles on her head sorta ground the whole look. It's cute. She also has a subtle stylized Aqua logo on her chest. By now you may have realized that a good percentage of the Hoenn section of this video consists of me fawning over ORAS' redesigns, and I have no regrets about that. I think it's completely warranted. Archie is Team Aqua's leader, and he doesn't look all that well in his Gen 3 art, does he? He looks a little uncomfortable. I think the design itself is underwhelming as well. You'd expect the leader of Team Aqua to look like Blackbeard or something, but he's just kind of a dude. I'm also not a fan of how his outfit is almost entirely black except for the headband. 90% of him is just one solid flat color, and the Aqua logo seems slapped on sorta randomly. It wouldn't have hurt to at least give him some blue pants or some small blue or striped accents. I can't lie, this design feels a bit like a placeholder to me. Luckily, ORAS swoops in again to save us with this amazing Archie redesign. He wears a wetsuit just like the admins, but he also sports the same kind of headband as the grunts. He really looks like an amalgamation of all the different Team Aqua aesthetics. The anchor neck chain is very appropriate thematically, and just like with Maxie's glasses, it has a keystone in it that Archie uses to mega evolve his Sharpedo. The coat thing he wears around his hips resembles a fishing net, which further emphasizes the sea aesthetic. Even Archie's expression is, well, more expressive now. The beard is a bit longer and sharper, and the egg-shaped shadow around his eyes matches his Sharpedo and makes him look determined and menacing. He's not necessarily wearing stereotypical pirate attire, but he certainly has the attitude of a pirate captain. I would like to make it clear that although I wasn't very kind to Maxie and Archie's Gen 3 designs, I don't actually mind the fact that they were used in the Rainbow Rocket episode in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. It's a neat acknowledgement of Pokemon's history, and seeing those old outdated designs in 3D was a fun novelty. If you paid attention, you might have noticed that I characterized Team Magma as stuck-up corporate dudes and Team Aqua as hardened labor workers. That's kind of what their conflict is really about. It's not made super obvious by the game, so a lot of people might be inclined to think that they are just mindless eco-terrorist factions, but the subtext implies that Team Magma is interested in expanding the land to make room for more human progress, and perhaps create more corporate jobs, while Team Aqua wishes to expand the sea, which is the biggest habitat for Pokemon on the planet. This would also help their line of work if it indeed relies on fishing, like I speculated before. It's all based on a real political controversy that was going on in Japan at the time Ruby and Sapphire came out. If you want to learn more about it and haven't seen it already, I urge you to watch this video by Tama Hero. It's required viewing if you like Pokemon and watch YouTube. It's just one of those quintessential Pokemon videos. You'll find a link to it in the description. Team Galactic was introduced as modern-day Sinnoh's villains. Their aesthetic reminds me of typical depictions of spacesuits in sci-fi media, which is fitting considering the organization's name and goals. In the case of their grunts, their look makes them seem quite unthreatening when paired with their somewhat dorky haircuts, but I honestly think it works well for their concept. At the end of the day, Galactic is a team led by a misanthropic edgelord who wants to rid the world of emotions. It kinda makes sense that their uniforms wouldn't exactly align with the average person's idea of fashion. The role of Galactic admins is filled by the team's 4 commanders. Mars, Jupiter, and Charon each wear unique variations of the Galactic uniform, but Saturn kinda just looks like a regular grunt but with a worse haircut. Mars is probably the most popular of the 4. She's quite cute and her skirt sorta makes her look like some kind of idol. I'm a fan of Jupiter's asymmetrical look. I like when characters wear pants or stockings in a way where one leg is fully covered and the other isn't. This might be too deep of a cut, but I think I was introduced to this design trait by Mira from Bakugan. It's messy and strange, but in a cool way. Charon was introduced later than the other 3 commanders in Platinum. He is recognizable through his lab coat, glasses, and shorter, stockier stature. He visually fits the archetype of an evil scientist. In a way, you can look at Charon as some kind of dark reflection of the Pokemon Professor trope. I like how all 4 commanders have pretty striking and distinct hair colors. It makes it easy to distinguish them from the teal-haired regular grunts, even in sprite form. Team Galactic is led by Cyrus, real charmer this one. He wears a more detailed version of the normal Galactic uniforms that looks slightly more tactical, I guess, but other than that, he doesn't have all that much going on. He does somewhat exude some of that bland energy that I criticized Gen 3 Maxie and Archie for, but in this case I actually think it makes perfect sense. Like I said before, Cyrus is a bit of a weirdo. His whole ideology is that sentimentality and emotions make people and the world they live in incomplete. Someone like this would be a bit bland and even awkward. A more bombastic personality and design wouldn't fit his goals as much. Cyrus wants to use the legendary Pokemon of the Creation Trio to create a world devoid of feeling. It's crazy how the stakes in Pokemon escalated from fighting against a crime mob to preventing the universe from being recreated in the span of just 4 generations. By now, the story in Pokemon leaned completely into its fantasy side. Pokemon Legends Arceus revealed that the name Team Galactic was passed to Cyrus by his ancestors from the time Sinnoh was called Hisui. The old Team Galactic, or more accurately the Galaxy Expedition team, was made up largely of foreigners who came to Hisui to tame the region and learn about it and its environment. They were aiming to understand and work with wild Pokemon in order to develop better relations and forge a better future during a time where Pokemon were mostly feared by humans. Even though he thought he was doing the right thing, it's ironic and quite tragic that Cyrus would go on to commit such nefarious actions under the name Galactic. But if the Galaxy team were good guys in the days of Hisui, then who were the villains in Pokemon Legends Arceus? Well, in Japanese, the Diamond and Pearl clans use the same word as the evil teams to describe themselves. Basically, they're all called gangs. The English version calls the Hisui factions clans rather than Team Diamond and Team Pearl, which I much prefer as they are not villainous and therefore not relevant to this video. But we can start the Hisui villain discussion by talking about the Misfortune Sisters. As a trio of bandits who engage in small-scale petty crime in Hisui, they don't really have an overarching goal, but they're interesting because of their relations to other characters. Clover used to be part of the Diamond clan, Coin was part of the Pearl clan, while Charm is a settler who came from Kanto and used to be part of the Galaxy Expedition team. Basically, their group consists of former members of the 3 main factions in Hisui. Like the majority of characters from Legends Arceus, the Misfortune Sisters look to be related to characters in the modern day. Clover appears to be related to Candace and Coin resembles Saturn, but the most interesting of the 3 is Charm, who seems to be related to both Agatha and Bertha, confirming they weren't just coincidental lookalikes, but rather have some degree of shared ancestry. This is something fans have been speculating about from the beginning. They're both Old Lady Elite 4 members, and while it's not as obvious in English, their names are also supposed to be similar. Their relation was unknown prior to Legends Arceus, but Charm not only looks like both of them, but she also uses Mon similar to theirs. The fact that she came from Kanto implies that Agatha's side of the family stayed there while Bertha's side moved to what is now Sinnoh. Makes me wonder if the two know of each other and that they're likely related. Although not as relevant in the main story, the true villain of Hisui is actually none other than Volo. In his usual outfit, he simply wears a Ginkgo Guild merchant uniform. The only striking aspects of his design are his rather imposing height and his resemblance to Cynthia. Their relationship is even more ambiguous than with the other Hisui characters because of Volo's particularly cryptic background. They could be directly related, but I think it's more likely that the resemblance has to do with them both being members or descendants of the Celestica people, but that's a story for another time. Volo's true form, so to speak, is shown when he battles you and reveals he teamed up with Giratina in an attempt to reach Arceus. This look is heavily inspired by Arceus, which just shows how obsessed with it Volo is. It's almost like a Segna suit from Masters. It looks very majestic, but the style doesn't quite match the traditional clothing of Hisui. It looks even older than that and calls to mind Western garments from ancient Greece or Rome. Regardless of anybody's theories about Volo's backstory and his status as an immortal or time traveler, this design feels incredibly grand and appropriate for a final battle in a game called Legends Arceus. The final battle is with Arceus itself, but you get what I mean, this is the final story battle in the post-game. The design also emphasizes Volo's mysterious nature because it feels so out of place, but the main reason it's so impactful to encounter is because of how harshly it contrasts Volo's usual pedestrian look. He goes from looking like your average merchant to looking like some sort of Hellenistic era depiction of a god in a matter of moments. I just wish this design wasn't spoiled to me by a YouTube thumbnail back when the game came out. Anyway, Volo's goal to capture Arceus and use it to create a different kind of world mirrors Cyrus's plan. Makes you wonder if he was inspired by records of Volo from the Galaxy team. I think it's clever how despite having very similar objectives, Cyrus is devoid of emotion while Volo is incredibly passionate. Before going over Unova's Team Plasma, I'd like to make it clear that I won't be covering N in this video because basically everything I have to say about him I already mentioned in my video on Rivals and it'd be pointless to repeat myself, so I encourage you to watch that if you want to hear my thoughts on N. Team Plasma's grunts are most notable for looking like knights. This is in line with their motives because more so than any other evil team, Plasma really wants to pass themselves off as the good guys in their self-righteous goal of liberating Pokemon. Making use of traditional heroic aesthetics makes perfect sense for them. Above the level of regular grunts, there's Team Plasma's Shadow Triad. Although you don't actually fight them until Black 2 and White 2, they seem to be special enforcers or escorts for Team Plasma's higher-ups. If Plasma operates like a monarchy, I think the Shadow Triad is akin to the Royal Guards. Their loyalty lies with Ghetsis because he apparently saved their lives. Their aesthetic is inspired by Ninja, which stands in stark contrast to Team Plasma's usual knight look. The three all ended up looking identical, but there's a piece of concept art that shows each of them with different hairstyles and outfits. I wish this had stuck in the final version. Team Plasma doesn't have admins, but it has its 7 sages. Most of these guys only really have overworld sprites in black and white, but the most important one is Ghetsis. He is functionally the leader of the team as he manipulated his adoptive son N into fulfilling the role of Plasma's king and pushing Ghetsis' own agenda. Like the other sages, Ghetsis looks very royal and follows that same almost medieval theme as the grunts. His intricate color piece even resembles the rampart of a castle. I think this design is quite amazing. It's very much unique among evil team leaders, but it's also unusual for Pokemon characters period, as I can't really think of anyone else at the time of Gen 5 at least to have such an over-the-top fantasy design. I love the asymmetrical cloak and the eye-like markings on it. It all looks very cryptic and strange, and it makes Ghetsis look like the leader of some sort of secret organization that holds esoteric knowledge. Interestingly enough, although they are not related by blood, Ghetsis does bear a superficial resemblance to his son N, as they both have somewhat similar light green hair. But Team Plasma's mission to liberate Pokemon was more of a convenient lie that Ghetsis came up with to separate people from their Pokemon. His true goal was to simply use N in either Reshiram or Zekrom to establish dominance over Unova. When N leaves Team Plasma and stops being Ghetsis' puppet, the faction splits. After the events of Black and White, Team Plasma goes through a bit of a schism. The members who are loyal to N basically become true good guys and trade their initial grand ambitions for smaller scale humanitarian goals, but the members who stayed loyal to Ghetsis remain active. This version of Team Plasma abandons its heroic facade and no longer hides its nefarious intentions. The grunts ditched the squire outfits and now dress like plain old terrorists. Side note, the word terrorist is often used by the media to demonize organized groups that fight for some sort of political or social change, or even just people they don't like to sow fear among the general public. This is not the case with the new Team Plasma. They are genuine bad-intentioned criminals working for a dangerous man. Anyway, like I said, their new outfits are basically the opposite of their original uniforms. Now they are very modern and way more militaristic. They resemble a more hardcore and serious version of Team Rocket actually, with the black and the hats. I think they are some of the best grunt designs actually. You can immediately tell what they're about and that they mean business. For the sake of being thorough, the Plasma members that stayed loyal to N use the same outfits and designs in Black 2 and White 2 as they did in Black and White. We even get a battle sprite for Rude, one of the now good sages. Zinzalin, however, was one of the 7 sages of Team Plasma that stayed loyal to Ghetsis after Black and White. He fulfills a similar role to that of an admin now, and his design also reflects the change in Plasma's image. He looks way less royal now, and his color scheme is pretty dark. He looks prepared for the cold, which makes sense as the new Team Plasma uses Kyurem as a weapon and even freezes parts of Unova. He's got the same kind of stitched X on his head, whereas both the grunt designs. For some reason, I really like Zinzalin's shape that he forms with his big puffy coat and tall hat. It's a very recognizable silhouette. Ghetsis himself also dresses way more sinister now. He swaps the colorful fancy royal wear for a more streamlined all-black outfit. This design unapologetically looks like a villain, whereas the previous one was more ambiguous. The new coat is appropriately less grand and inflated and now keeps more of a low profile. In spite of this, the eye motif is still present, albeit in a different art style, which I find quite clever. Even his eyepiece visor monocle thingy is now more angular and has a black frame. It's all very edgy and intimidating. Honestly, both Ghetsis designs are great and fulfill their roles perfectly. I think Ghetsis is, as of now, the most evil character in Pokemon. Every other villain with a grand goal had some sort of justification, regardless of whether it made sense or not. At the end of the day, most of them thought they were doing something good, even if they weren't. Ghetsis is just an irredeemable jerk. On top of his evil scheme, he manipulates his adoptive son and then berates him and calls him a freak after he turns against him. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, he even threatens to physically hurt Lily, a child. Even Colress says he despises Ghetsis, but speaking of Colress, he is a scientist that worked work with Team Plasma in Black 2 and White 2. His only real interest lies in bringing out the potential in Pokemon, and Team Plasma's Kyurem plan was merely a way for him to research this. He isn't actually loyal to their cause and ends up yielding to the player with no resistance once you show him your strength. He's the kind of person with no allegiances who just sorta wants to see what's gonna happen next. His design is that of a scientist. It's not like he wears the Team Plasma emblem or anything. His outfit is quite futuristic actually, more so than your average Pokemon scientist character up to that point. Much like Charon, Colress can be seen as somewhat of a perversion of the known archetype of the Pokemon professor. Colress returns in the Alola games, and in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon he is responsible for developing the N-Solarizer and N-Lunarizer, items used to artificially trigger Necrozma's fusions with Solgaleo or Lunala. It makes sense considering his experience with Kyurem's fused forms. Wonder what he'd think about Peony casually being able to craft the Reigns of Unity. He also contributes to defeating Ghetsis in the Rainbow Rocket episode. His new design is more sci-fi inspired with control panels on his wrist and such. He almost looks like some kind of cyborg or a time traveler and now wears a lab coat and trench coat hybrid. A very unique piece that extends to cover his hands. I actually think this version of Colress is a bit more memorable and well designed. Lastly, I'd like to mention Anthea and Concordia, N's often forgotten adoptive sisters. I'm not sure of their role in Team Plasma beyond helping raise and take care of N, and they don't seem to have villainous intent, but I think it's appropriate to mention them here. They only make relatively brief appearances to deliver exposition about N, but they seem to care about their brother. In Black 2 and White 2, they are with the good Team Plasma, which to me has proved that they only really stuck around for N's sake and never really cared about Ghetsis' ambitions. I think they're really sweet older sisters. From their nearly angelic appearances to the way they talk, Anthea and Concordia are presented as somewhat strange though benevolent entities. They're even called goddesses of love and peace in Japanese. In that sense, they are similar to N, who also has a sort of mysterious, otherworldly presence. These peculiar siblings sure appear to be beyond regular people's comprehension. Team Flare from X and Y went back to being pretty basic compared to Plasma. The grunts have a business suit aesthetic going on. Honestly, based on their outfits alone, they look like they'd be higher ranking than just regular grunts, but it makes sense that in Team Flare, even the grunts dress fancy because the whole group has a fashion theme which plays into Kalos's greater theme of beauty. The Flare grunts prominently use a single shade of reddish orange, giving them striking monochromatic color schemes. Normally, you'd expect some details like their hair or sunglasses to be slightly different shades for the sake of contrast, but these designs seem to very intentionally rely on a single bright shade across the board. Bizarrely, Team Flare's admins are not unique characters like with Teams Rocket, Magma, Aqua, or even Team Galactic's commanders. Instead, they're a generic trainer class like the Grunts, sorta like how the Rocket executives were treated in Gen 2. They also sadly didn't get official art. These admins look even more posh than the Grunts. The signature Flare reddish orange is now an accent while their main color is a luxurious looking white. They even have bits of gold here and there. They have a cocky and annoying aura, but I actually think the designs are great because that kind of vibe is exactly what I'd expect from Team Flare. It's a shame these admin designs are often forgotten. Team Flare makes up for its generic admins by having a group of scientists as the non-generic evil team characters. There's Aliana, Bryony, Celosia, Mabel, and Xerosic. Aside from Xerosic, who has more appearances and a more notable role in the story, the other Flare scientists are pretty overlooked. Admittedly, the four of them have similar aesthetics and they don't quite have unique personalities or moments in the story. I feel like a lot of people may get them mixed up in spite of the fact that each of them has a distinguishing signature color. Perhaps 5 scientists was too many. The story probably only called for a maximum of 3. In spite of this, all of the scientists are quite well designed in my opinion. The girls too each have unique design traits outside of just different colored hair. It's not that the concepts for these characters were bad, far from it, it's just that X and Y didn't take full advantage of them. There's clearly thought and care that was put behind designing them, and I think they deserve more appreciation. I mean, come on, they're cute. It's like they're a girl band and Xerosic is their manager. Another notable member of Team Flare is the Elite Four Malva, but the thing is, in the story of X and Y, the role she plays is mostly that of a newscaster and later League member. She never really opposes you as a member of Team Flare, and even helps you take down Xerosic in the postgame. I think having one of the Elite Four be a part of the regional evil team is great world building, but in Malva's case, her involvement with Team Flare was more of a fun fact that was going on in the background, so I think a full analysis of her design and concept is better saved for a video about Pokemon League members. Finally, Team Flare's boss is Lysandre, and his design is quite great. His main color is black, while the typical Flare colors are just accents on his suit. This distinguishes him from the grunts, admins, and scientists alike. He notably doesn't sport the Flare emblem anywhere on his outfit, which makes sense since his identity as their leader wasn't supposed to be publicly known. His furry color gives him an air of royalty, and combined with the beard and hair also evokes the look of a lion's mane, which makes sense considering he is known for using Pyroar. Lysandre is also noticeably tall, which draws a parallel between him and AZ. This is of course because the two are distantly related, as Lysandre is a descendant of AZ's brother, but also because the two both wanted to use the ultimate weapon after becoming disillusioned with the world. This may not have been made obvious enough in the games, but Lysandre's plight seems to stem from inequality in the world. He thinks the world is becoming ugly because there's not enough resources to go around and certain people hoard them while others get none. His plan is to use the ultimate weapon to commit global genocide and only allow Team Flare and the select few to live. He thinks this would rid the world of strife and create a more peaceful environment where neither Pokemon or people would have to suffer. At least that's how I interpret his motivations, but his expanded characterization in the manga may have influenced me somewhat. The irony lies in the fact that by arbitrarily choosing who gets to live and die, he is himself creating a world elite that would benefit from the loss of the masses. Even the outfits and attitude of Team Flare, his chosen ones, reflects the attitudes and arrogance of the ruling class. Lysandre's plan would create more of the problems that led him to start Team Flare in the first place. You can call this bad writing, but I think this cognitive dissonance on Lysandre's part is exactly what makes him the villain. He fails to see that his plan and his followers perpetuate the very thing that he claims to hate the most. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit and this subtext isn't as clear to everyone who played X and Y, but I think Lysandre and Team Flare explore some really important and serious topics which I admire greatly. The theme of class division even reflects the French Revolution, which makes sense in Kalos, the region based on France. I think it's intentional, but I can't know for sure. Still, at the end of the day, the story and themes of X and Y weren't exactly accomplished masterfully. The fact that there's great concepts at a base level doesn't mean much when the games don't present and explore them effectively. This goes for Lysandre as well, since many people seem to perceive him and Team Flare as bad villains with a stupid plan and unclear motivations. At the end of the game, Lysandre wears these mechanical contraptions meant for absorbing energy from Xerneas or Yveltal. It's not a different design or anything, it's just him equipping extra gear, but it's neat, you know, it looks cool, and the glasses look like the ones that all the scientists wear. I guess you could also consider Essentia a villain in the post-game of X and Y. She commits some Pokemon theft and vandalism in Lumiose, but Emma, the girl inside the expansion suit, is totally innocent as she was just being controlled by Xerosic through the suit. After the initial test run, he allows Emma to keep the suit and use it freely, which she does to help her with detective jobs in Lumiose after taking over the Looker Bureau. The design of the expansion suit is really cool and cyberpunk-esque, pretty unique for Pokemon, at least at the time of Gen 6. Funnily enough, the helmet with the letter on it resembles those worn by Common X and other characters in Beyblade X. Emma's regular design is appropriately simple. She's an orphan who grew up on the streets and she's got kinda scuffed, patched up clothes. I actually kinda dig this outfit. I'm a fan of her character in general and I look forward to seeing more of her in Legends ZA. Evil Team's post-Team Flare were no longer the main antagonists of their respective games and they became a lot less threatening. Many of these newer teams aren't even true bad guys, not really. Still, they take villainous roles and oppose the player, even if just temporarily, so they're definitely relevant to our discussion. The first of these not-so-evil teams is Team Skull. They're basically Alolan delinquents. Their grunts kinda act and look like a young person's idea of what it means to be tough. They have this punk-adjacent / hip-hop aesthetic. Don't get me wrong, I think it's stylish, but their attitude sorta convey the idea that they're trying really hard to be scary. Oftentimes, they just end up coming off as silly and over the top, and their activities tend to consist of loitering, causing a ruckus, and the occasional Pokemon kidnapping. Some of what they do is reprehensible for sure, but it's far from organized crime, and they lack an overarching objective. They're just misguided kids who failed their island trials and are looking for a place to belong. I think the fact that Team Skull has a color scheme made up of black and white could be meant to stand in contrast to Alola's otherwise colorful rainbow theme. After all, they're the people who failed to fit into this culture and ended up being left behind, so it makes sense that they'd oppose it. I also like how the patterns on the grunts' hats and masks have features of a skull like eye holes and teeth. Team Skull's admin and big sis is the poison-type specialist Plumeria. Instead of a skull hat, she's got two skull-like hair-tie thingies, and her pink and yellow pigtails help her stand out from the regular grunts. Her eyeshadow calls to mind Gyaro makeup, which is interesting in a region not based on Japan, but it also subtly resembles the eye holes in a skull. Similarly to Matt from Team Aqua, she sports a tattoo of the skull logo on her abdomen to rep her team. All of the Skull members feature a zigzag or cross pattern somewhere, and Plumeria creatively has these straps hanging from her top that forms the shape of an X. I like Plumeria because of how much she cares about the members of Team Skull. She's not only their superior, but also has an older sister-like or even motherly affection towards them, even when she knows they can act like total dummies. Team Skull's leader Guzma is one of my favorite characters in Pokemon. He pulls off the frosted tips surprisingly well, and his design gets across exactly what you'd expect the big bad boss of a small-time gang to look like. His shades feature the skull eye shapes that the grunts have on their hats, and his watch denotes an air of status and luxury. The fact that these accessories, and especially his skull logo chain, are gold hint at his position in the group when you consider all other members have silver chains instead. He also has the same tattoo as Plumeria, except on his arm and in purple instead of pink. If Plumeria is the mother of Team Skull, then Guzma is their dad. Guzma has a past with Kukui. The two of them seem to have been rivals mentored by Hala. Both of them failed to become trial captains, but where Kukui pivoted to becoming a professor, Guzma went and formed Team Skull to rebel against Alola, but also to give other misfits like him a place where they can belong. That's why I like him so much. He's a bully for sure, but his actions stem from feeling like a failure, but he at least ensures that others won't feel the same inadequacy by allowing people who didn't adapt to being trainers in Alola into Team Skull. There's also the fact that he's a bug specialist, and I like bug types. Guzma wisens up by the end of the Alola games, and while it's a little sad, he disbands Team Skull. The members get these slightly revised designs afterwards. The grunts become regular Punk Girl and Punk Guy trainers, and Guzma and Plumeria sorta cover up or remove the skull imagery from their designs. I appreciate that they didn't just reuse their old looks post disbanding, because it wouldn't have made as much sense. I give them props for including these versions of the characters, even if they're not entirely new designs and just re-edits. Also, Team Skull temporarily hires Gladion as an enforcer, and his style almost looks the part, although it's not quite the same aesthetic. Either way, he is covered in my rival video, just like N. The other antagonistic faction in the Alola games is the Aether Foundation. They aren't exactly villains either. In fact, they're an environmentalist group that takes care of Pokemon and tries to preserve wildlife. They just end up opposing you temporarily for story reasons that I'll get into later, hence they're mentioned in this video. Their low-ranking grunt equivalent members are the Aether Foundation employees. They have this futuristic, almost utopian aesthetic. It's all very modern and bright, and they appropriately look like people working at some kind of sanctuary or even a hospital or recovery center. Of course, their outfits also fit a research setting, and I guess Aether Paradise is all of those things combined. The employees' numerous large pockets could have a variety of practical uses. They could store Pokemon food, medicine, their own Pokeballs, or even research data on flash drives. In a way, they're a bit like zookeepers, I guess. I also think these designs are successful at coming off as friendly. The employees are quite cute actually, and they seem to have a bit more personality than say your average grunt. I could even see these as the protagonists of some other video game, though perhaps not Pokemon. They kinda look like proper characters despite being a generic trainer class. There's also the Aether Foundation scientists, though sadly they do not have official art. They're basically a subcategory of Aether employees. They look way less friendly because of their somewhat imposing coats and the fact that their faces are obscured. I think this makes sense since these scientists would work more behind the scenes, so there's presumably less of a concern about seeming approachable for them. I think their suits and especially their helmets could be meant to protect them from potentially hostile environments in Ultra Space, since the Aether Foundation focuses a lot of its research on Ultra Wormholes. Maybe the scientists are constantly at risk of exposure to Ultra Space radiation or other dangerous factors, so they need to wear protective gear. In terms of higher-ups, the Aether Foundation has a couple. There's Branch Chief Faba and Assistant Branch Chief Wick. Now Wick is a super sweet person who isn't really involved in any of Aether's shady business and never opposes the player. In fact, she seems to be on your side if anything. I'm mentioning her in this video because she's a member of the Foundation, and not because I somehow consider her a villain, because she's just not. She's very caring and supportive of the Aether President's children. Wick's design has that futuristic Aether look, but it's more elegant and formal than the regular employees, and she features pink as her signature highlight color. Despite seeming relatively young, her big glasses and haircut almost call to mind the stereotypical grandma, which plays into her caring nature. But all the praise I gave to Wick for being such a lovely person is by no means applicable to Faba. All of the antagonists in the main stories of the Alola games have some sort of moral ambiguity, but Faba really just seems to be interested in furthering his career at basically any cost. He's a scheming, conniving coward who will take advantage of any opportunity to put himself in a better position, and he will betray anybody to do so. He also gets way too much of an ego stroke every time he brags about his title and authority as Branch Chief. Thankfully in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon he gets demoted after teaming up with Team Rainbow Rocket. Faba's uniform seems to be more in line with the Aether scientists, and just like Wick, he has a signature highlight color in lime green. Interestingly, he specializes in psychic types. His weird goggles remind me of Flygon, but he obviously doesn't use it seeing as it's not a psychic type. They're probably supposed to be more reminiscent of the beans that he's named after. Faba's design is great in my opinion. He intentionally doesn't look like a nice guy, and you can basically read his intentions on his face. He kinda reminds me of Petrol actually. The Aether Foundation's president Lusamine is the main villain of Pokemon Sun and Moon, but not really Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Her story is a bit different between the games. Here's the deal. In Sun and Moon, Lusamine becomes obsessed with Ultra Space and goes mad because of Nihilego venom. Her initial goal was to find her husband who disappeared years ago in an accident, but she kinda loses the plot by the end. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, she is not poisoned by Nihilego and instead is more concerned with saving Alola from Necrozma, who is the actual quote-unquote main villain in these games, if you can call a Pokemon that. In this version, her extreme actions and mistreatment of her children come from her, showing that maybe it's in her character to be possessive and controlling even without outside influence. As the president, Lusamine doesn't have to wear an Aether Foundation uniform, but her style still reflects the group's core visual signifiers like the white and gold and general elegance. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the other way around and she designed the Aether uniforms in accordance to her own personal style. I mean, she did try and force her children to wear the clothes she liked, so it would be pretty in character for her. Lusamine's whole vibe is that of a fashion model. Her look has that experimental yet beautiful flair about it, while still coming off as somewhat sterile in my opinion. I think there's something almost creepy about her cleanliness, which I believe works great for her character. There's also the fact that she's apparently uncannily young looking for her age. She's supposed to be in her 40s but looks quite a bit younger. The black crystals on her shoes and especially the one on her chest kind of resemble fragments of Necrozma. I doubt they're intended to be that, but the symbolism is there. Both of them open ultra wormholes and they're shining yet terrifying foes. Her zeal towards saving her husband and stopping Necrozma also indicates that she may have quite a savior complex. Although her story wasn't as compelling and central to the plot in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, I think Lusamine is an amazing villain across the board because she reflects a more personal and real kind of struggle than other antagonists in Pokemon. She's an overly controlling and borderline abusive parent, and this isn't just a background fact. Her relationship with her children, Lily and Gladion, is central to the plot, and you really get to see how her words and actions affect her daughter. Lusamine's status as a parent isn't an Easter egg like with Giovanni, and she's not over the top theatrically evil like Getsus. Her parenthood is more grounded, and her scenes with Lily are often genuinely uncomfortable to watch. I'm glad Pokemon is willing to tackle more real and mature topics like one's relationship with their parents and even child neglect. I especially think it's important and helpful for Pokemon's younger demographic to be exposed to these issues, not only because it introduces serious concepts in an age-appropriate and digestible way, but also because some kids may feel more seen and understood if they themselves are going through something similar to the characters in their game. Only in Sun and Moon, Lusamine has this mother beast form fused with Nihilego. It's extremely cool and the closest we've come to a Pokemon human fusion in the mainline games. It suits the narrative well because it shows how Nihilego is taking over Lusamine and their colors turn from white to black. My only gripe is that you don't actually battle this form directly, rather it just acts as a regular trainer with the added effect of giving all her Pokemon a buff. For the sake of completion, let's also throw Moan in there. He's a former member of the Aether Foundation and Lusamine's husband. He disappeared in an Ultra Wormhole accident years ago and has lost his memories. He now works at the Poképelago and helps the player grow Pokébeans, which is almost comically underwhelming considering how dramatic his disappearance was for his family. He just sorta looks like a farmer, but his hair does resemble his son's Gladion. For some reason, he wears orange in Sun and Moon and green in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but his design otherwise stays the same. Moan was underutilized in these games, and the plot point of his disappearance wasn't fully explored, but at least the anime gave us a proper heartfelt story about him and his family that actually unfolded over the course of 2 generations. The team introduced in Galar is Team Yell, and they're even less threatening and villainous than Team Skull. Basically, all of their ranks consist only of grunts. They're just toxic fans of Marnie who get in the way of other gym challengers to raise her odds of becoming champion. They're obnoxious and cause trouble by inconveniencing other people, but they have no criminal aspirations. Marnie herself isn't fond of Team Yell's antics, so really they're not helping anybody by being such nuisances. As it turns out, Team Yell is merely made up of gym trainers from Marnie's hometown of Spikemuth. The reason they're so loyal to her is, well, because she represents their humble town on the region-wide stage. If Marnie becomes champion, then that would bring some attention to the struggling Spikemuth. The designs of the Team Yell grunts are simply that of the Spikemuth gym trainers, who wear variations of the Dark-type Galar uniform, but with some more accessories like vests, face paint, and horns. They're basically trying to look like more hardcore and intimidating versions of the Spikemuth gym trainers. Team Yell's boss is technically Marnie's older brother Piers, who is also the Spikemuth gym leader. Despite his role as Yell's boss, he never really intended for them to act so brash and get in in everyone's way. He probably just kinda wanted to support his little sister, but his underlings took it too far. Piers is by no means a villain. In fact, he is one of your greatest allies in the story of Sword and Shield. He's just a chill older brother and a cool singer, so I will reserve further discussion about him for a video on the gym leaders in Pokemon because that's what his role actually is. I think having a team of toxic fans is very appropriate for the story of the Galar Gym Challenge considering the sports inspiration in Sword and Shield. I also like the whole Spikemuth subplot, and the fact that one of the later gym leaders is also the villainous team boss feels like a neat callback to Giovanni. But a part of me still finds Team Yell underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, I don't need all my teams to be evil. In fact, I love the other teams that aren't, but I'm not entirely convinced Yell is worthy of having the title of regional team because they're not that involved in the story of Galar. It's merely a matter of terminology, but when I compare them to all the other teams and even the Diamond and Pearl clans, Team Yell just feels a little bit too inconsequential to the plot of their games. I still like the idea though. The true villains in Galar, however, are Chairman Rose's mega corporation, Macrocosmos. As a conglomerate, Macrocosmos controls a whole bunch of smaller subsidiaries and therefore has influence over a lot of the region's different industries, including the Galar Gym Challenge and Pokemon League. Their employees have two slightly different variants. There's the normal, less conspicuous League staff members that are depicted in the official art and are seen throughout the game around all the gym stadiums, and then there's the more blatant Macrocosmos employees that you encounter towards the end of the games. They have darker hair and shades, and they sport the Rose Tower logo on their undershirts, which is different from the regular Macrocosmos logo but effectively represents the same faction. Basically, both employee variants are loyal to Chairman Rose, but the former present themselves as more impartial and humble League staff members, while the latter wear their allegiance to Macrocosmos on their sleeve, and you actually battle them as antagonists. I took way too long to talk about the distinction between these average looking jobbers. Essentially, their designs are a mix of sports event staff and security guards. They look sleek and modern, and their style is in line with the Galar Gym/League sports aesthetic with all the logos and the whistles. Other than that, not much to say. They use a lot of steel types. Above the employees, there's Chairman Rose's faithful secretary Oleana. Her design is very stylish and elegant. Her white coat hints at her background in science, and her hexagonal earrings resemble the Rose Tower logo, which is a more subtle way to indicate her faction than just having a logo on her chest or something. Oleana is very loyal to Rose and clearly admires the man. You might assume she's only a mere secretary or assistant, but she also serves as vice president, and her role in Macrocosmos is just as important as Rose's. She helps keep him focused and on track with his work, and in Twilight Wings, a miniseries set in the universe of the games, we see just how many responsibilities and unexpected chores Oleana has to deal with. As for the man himself, the main villain of Sword and Shield, Chairman Rose is a controversial figure. The main reason his character is criticized is because his motivations and plan don't seem to make that much sense at first glance. He wants to use Eternatus to solve an energy crisis 1,000 years into the future. He holds up Leon at the end of the game to talk him into helping him, and then interrupts the champion title match by reviving Eternatus. Thing is, he could have just done all that after the match, and the trivial yet somewhat nonsensical choice to be impatient is sort of treated by the story as a big villain reveal. His urgency makes him come off as childish, but at the same time, what he is doing doesn't actually really feel like that much of a bad thing, right? I mean, he clearly thought he could control Eternatus, and as far as I can tell, he didn't use any morally questionable tactics to try out his plan, so I just felt sort of confused about not only why he's in such a rush, but also what actually makes him the villain. He was imprudent for sure, but I don't think he had bad enough intentions. His motivations seemed confusing, and his climactic act of villainy felt morally underwhelming, almost like there wasn't enough intention behind it. I can't tell if I'm supposed to be against him because Eternatus went out of control and endangered the region, or because he didn't want to wait for Leon to finish the title match to start the plan. Which part is morally reprehensible? Both? Neither? He got arrested afterwards, so he clearly did something wrong. In the years since Sword and Shield came out, side media warmed me up on Rose a little bit, and now I feel like I could make a case for him. Considering the energy crisis would happen within 1,000 years, Rose could have reasonably waited a little. But put yourself in his shoes for a second. The way he saw it, he might have been the only person with the will and means to solve this problem. Perhaps he was worried that if something happened to him, even in 1,000 years, not another person would come who would do something to prevent Galar from losing its energy. A mindset like this is flawed, but it would explain why he would do everything in his power to accomplish the Eternatus plan as soon as possible. Of course, this reading of his character doesn't save Rose if you didn't like him in the main story, because it's not explained in the games, but at least for me, it made me look at the character just a little bit differently. As for his design, he looks like a typical big shot, but there are a few clever elements incorporated into his outfit. His belt buckle is hexagonal just like the aforementioned Rose Tower logo, and his tie sorta resembles a rose with a red color and the unique way it's knotted. You could even say that he's wearing grey because he's a steel type specialist, but that might be a bit of a stretch. Either way, he uses the same type as all of his lower ranking employees. The postgame of Sword and Shield features 2 additional villain characters in Swordward and Shieldbird. Now listen, I won't pretend that the world of Pokemon is completely serious and that silly or gag characters have no place in it, because they do. I don't mind some stupid villains here and there. But Swordward and Shieldbird have a really interesting concept and motivation that are wasted on characters like them. Basically, the 2 brothers claim to be descended from the ancient kings of Galar who first stopped Eternatus. During the main story, Sonia unveils that the kings did so with the help of Zacian and Zamazenta. Swordward and Shieldbird believe that the discovery of the legendary Pokemon's contribution somehow diminishes their prestige and status as alleged descendants of the kings. In retaliation, they attempt to sully Zacian and Zamazenta's reputations as heroes of legend by forcing them into a rampage. I think the political drama that arises from what was uncovered over the course of these games is really interesting. If a discovery that changes Galar's perception of her own history is made, it makes sense that there would be consequences. Unfortunately, Swordward and Shieldbird are quite annoying and hard to take seriously. They just come off as spoiled nuisances rather than narratively compelling threats, and cleaning up after them around Galar feels more like a chore rather than an intriguing epilogue to the main story. Their designs don't help either. They each wear suits in a color that corresponds to their namesake game, which makes sense, but their Sword and Shield shaped hairdos are completely ridiculous. I think these designs are hilarious and I wouldn't mind seeing them on a couple of zany gag characters, but I can't help but feel that an ambitious story idea like the Sword and Shield postgame would have suited a slightly more serious and grounded pair of villains. I don't hate the Galar postgame and I don't hate the Royal Brothers, I just can't unsee the slight missed potential of the storyline had it been handled with more care and meaningful character writing. But hey, at least it amounted to something. Swordward and Shieldbird learned their lesson and went on to use their wealth to fund the Galar Star Tournament, so all's well that ends well, I suppose. Our most recent team in Pokemon is Scarlet and Violet's Team Star. Much like its recent predecessors, Skull and Yell, Team Star aren't really bad guys. In fact, I would argue that between these last 3 evil teams, Star is the least evil of them. They're made up of school delinquents, so their customized academy uniforms vary slightly between game versions, but they're just simple color swaps. As you might expect, their grunts look a lot like regular students, very similar to what the player would wear, except with some added accessories and customization. The star motif is very present in these grunt designs. There's the star-shaped goggles, star neckties, and the Team Star logo on their iconic helmets, and in the case of the male grunts, their shoulders. But speaking of those helmets, it's worth pointing out that Team Star as a whole has a vague biker gang / racing theme in their style. You can see it not only in the grunt designs, but also when looking at their bases with the big racing flags, and of course, there's the fact that the bosses use Starmobiles in battle, basically giant custom rides that Revavroom are attached to. That's another unique thing about Team Star. Instead of just one boss, they have 5 of them, each in charge of a different crew. Of course, there's the big boss who was in charge of the whole team, but I think the separation into type-themed squads is pretty creative. Each boss specializes in a different type and has a unique personal style or theme. There's Giacomo, the dark-type boss of the Sagen squad, and the DJ. He's themed around music with his headphones, laptop, volume bar backstraps, and a cap with fast-forward and pause symbols on it. Even his coat's trimming resembles the timeline you'd see in a sound editing software, and his pockets look like volume sliders. Hell, his shoelaces resemble the shape of play buttons. There's Mela, the fire-type boss of the Shadar squad. She's like a DIY punk fashion kid with the cool rings and choker. She's also got these flame-themed gloves and hairstyle, but her most defining feature are her absurdly huge boots with flames coming off the sides. I could totally see her in the cover of an old-fashioned magazine or something. Her outfit isn't practical, but it sure as hell looks awesome. Big fan. Next up is Atticus, the Navi squad's poison-type boss. He cosplays as a ninja and conceals most of his face under a hood. The droopy flowy parts of his outfit resemble gooey poison and almost make him look like he's drenched in it. Interesting how he's another poison-type ninja like Koga and Janine. In the manga, he explained that he was actually inspired by them. Atticus has a knack for creating clothes and actually helped design the other boss' uniforms, including Mela's aforementioned boots. I would imagine that all of the more bizarre or experimental things they wear were custom made by Atticus. You can even see sewing tape wrapped around his torso like a tailor. Team Star's engineer is Ortega, the fairy-type boss in charge of the Rugba squad. He comes from a rich family, but his privilege doesn't mean he isn't resourceful, as he's behind the invention of the Starmobiles used by Team Star. He's spoiled and a bit short-tempered, and his style reflects his aristocratic roots. He wears a really fancy and over-the-top suit and even wields a cane like some kind of dancer or magician. He's a showman who likes to put on a spectacle. Lastly, there's the ever-reliable Aerie, the fighting-type boss of the Calf Squad and the mother of Team Star. Fittingly for her type, Aerie resembles a wrestler. She wears all these frills and leotard, but the concept is most obvious when you look at her face because it's covered in paint, making her look quite intimidating. It also resembles a luchador mask. Fighting type specialists are very common in Pokemon, as every region introduced at least one. Most of them have a similar approach to the idea of a martial artist, and they tend to feel a little samey in my opinion. I'm amazed by the fact that 9 generations in, they managed to create a fighting type character as unique as Aerie. I feel like she doesn't quite look like any of the previous specialists in her type and really stands out. But don't let Aerie's appearance fool you, because she's actually really sweet. She takes care of other members of the team, and she makes a point to always make sure everyone gets enough exercise. The 5 star bosses are very well designed and entertaining, but I also have an easy time believing their friend group and interpersonal dynamics. If you haven't noticed yet, the Team Star crews are named after the stars that make up the Cassiopeia constellation, which is also an alias used by Team Star's big boss Penny. Team Star started off as a group made up of marginalized students and misfits at the academy in Mesagoza. They rose up against their bullies and oppressors, but they ended up taking it too far and sort of becoming oppressors themselves. After spending a year in Galar, the team's boss Penny returns to Paldea and arranges Operation Starfall in an attempt to take down Team Star after feeling like they had lost their way. Although she was the big boss of the team, Penny isn't a villain. In fact, she works with the player to fight Team Star during the main campaign of Scarlet and Violet. For a more in-depth analysis of her character, I yet again point you to my Rivals video. Team Star's 6 bosses, including Penny, reunite at the end of the game, and they go on to repurpose Team Star to help other trainers in Paldea. Their friendship is very wholesome. In the post-game, there's a small side quest where you get to see the Team Star bosses in regular academy uniforms. I detest that they forced them to remove all their personal style and pizzazz, but I appreciate that they bothered to even make these models of the characters, especially since you only see them briefly. They just wear variations of the normal uniform, so there's not much to discuss, but it's fun to see Atticus and Aerie's faces, seeing as they're usually obscured. Working on this video reminded me of something I've always wondered about. Why exactly is it that the antagonists in Pokemon are even called teams? Like I mentioned before, in Japan they use a word that translates more accurately to gang, which feels like it suits criminal organizations better. And how come they kept the naming scheme throughout the franchise? Why were the factions after Team Rocket also called teams as opposed to cults or groups or anything else? It would be weird if they changed it now because it's pretty much tradition at this point, but the fact that they have villain factions that aren't called teams kinda shows that they've been interested in shaking up the formula since at least Gen 7. I can believe that these unrelated factions would all use a generic word like gang, but in the English version it's kinda funny that they all come to the same conclusion to use the word team. Perhaps they were inspired by each other, but does a group like, say, Team Star really want to use a word that is probably associated with extreme criminal activity in this world? It doesn't really make sense as they never set out to do anything evil and were just meant to protect outcasts. Maybe it was a deliberate intimidation tactic. The final villains of the overall story in Scarlet and Violet are the Professors Sada and Turo based on your version. Well, I say that, but they're dead by the time you start the game and the person you talk to is an AI clone that they made before kicking the bucket. So then would it be more accurate to say that the AI professors are the villains? Well, not quite, because they're actually well intentioned, it's just that they can't fight their programming. The villain in these games is the will of the professor that is being carried out by the AI's programming post-mortem. The professors were fascinated with Paradox Pokemon from different times. They programmed the AI to use a time machine to set these anachronistic Pokemon free in present-day Paldea, which would wreck the ecosystem's balance. Yes, I know that Paradox Pokemon aren't explicitly from this world's past or future, but the device is called a time machine in-game. Anyhow, while the ending of Scarlet and Violet is very climactic and poignant and I love it from a story perspective, the actual motivation of the professors is a bit hard to grasp. I get their childhood fascination with Paradox Pokemon and that they were inspired by the Scarlet and Violet books, but I don't quite know why they thought populating present Paldea with them would be a good thing. Was there some sort of scientific end to it? Did they just want to see them roam the region? Perhaps they thought that throwing the environment into disarray was the natural course of events for Paldea. Maybe they believed Paradox Pokemon would thrive and they considered that a natural selection even though it was caused by human interference. I really can't tell. Regardless, I'm not so sure it's worth neglecting your only child. Sada and Turo's designs are themed after the ancient world and futurism respectively. Basically, the two mimic the aesthetics of the Paradox Pokemon they're so interested in. Sada looks like a prehistoric huntress, while Turo, perhaps more appropriately for the story, looks a bit like a cyborg or at least wears some kind of high-tech suit. They also feature colors that match the games they're in, and they both resemble their son Arven. And that's all the relevant villains in mainline Pokemon, at least the ones that aren't also rivals. I'm looking forward to discovering who, if anybody, is the villain in Legend ZA. I just hope it's not Quasar Ing, because it feels too obvious and Pokemon already did the shady corporation trope 2 or 3 times. Watch this age like milk come October. If you like this video, maybe give the other installments in the series a watch, and if you want to support me, subscribe to the channel so I can get that dopamine from seeing the big number go up. It would be much appreciated, but regardless, thank you for your time.